The views expressed on this broadcast of the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or its affiliates. KHLT and Take12Radio.com are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Remember me, I'm the one down on the floor, telling you people that I ain't there anymore.
Welcome to Walking Through the Big Book with Chris Schroeder and Monty Meyer. And now, here's those two guys who investigate prior to contempt, Chris and the Monty'man.
Welcome, my friends. Welcome, recovery family. Those of you who are advocates and all of you who study endlessly this wonderful book, affectionately known as the Big Book by members of Alcoholics Anonymous and others. It is good to have you with us here today on Walking Through the Big Book with Chris Schroeder and myself, the Monty'man, your co-host. Chris, good day, my friend.
How is it going, Monty?
It is going well. We have a brand new blog up, folks. You can read that. They're short, and it's at take12radio.com. take12radio.wordpress.com. And Chris, we also have brand new videos up on our YouTube, which is youtube.com/Monty Meyer, MontyMeyer. And so we're going to be talking about walking through the Big Book and giving it some plugs on both of those. So folks, check those out as well. And Chris, it is an absolute gorgeous. This is the best day we've had all year here in Albany, Oregon. It is absolutely gorgeous. I wish I had a sunroof on the audio booth.
You know, it's not a bad day here in New Jersey either. I think spring is heading our way.
Well, good deal. And I know that it for those of us who live with alcoholism and addiction, it seems like the better the weather, the better mood we're in. That's
true. Sometimes our serenity is directly tied into meteorology for one reason or another.
Okay, we are in the Big Book, of course. If you have your Big Book with you, turn to A Vision for You. We left off last week. Did we leave off on 153? Is that where we were?
We left off on 153, the third paragraph down.
Okay, super.
You know, I think it's official, Monty. We're going to be in the Guinness's Book of World Records for the longest Big Book study.
We ought to register for that.
We probably should. What is this? The 34th hour of it?
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Anyway, at least we're not missing anything, and I'm telling you, I'm having a really good time doing this with you. Now, we left off last week. On 153,
right.
I'll start reading. In the chapter, Working with Others, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to health. I'm going to stop with that sentence again. You know, it seems like we keep beating a dead horse, but time and time again in this book, it explains that the approach to helping the alcoholic is in the step process.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I keep beating that dead horse is you really probably wouldn't know it going to a lot of the 12-step fellowships today, that's what the process is all about.
Right.
It almost seems like the process today is about, talking, about discussing things and getting current with people, all of which is important and good.
Uh-huh.
But it's not a treatment for alcoholism. In the chapter Working with Others, they were very specific. How many directions were in there, Monty? Remember we were counting?
Oh, 80 to 90 or something. No. There was more than that. There was over 100. Yeah, I remember now.
There was over 100 instructions in how to work with another alcoholic, how to help another alcoholic.
Right.
And very rarely in there was there drag them to a meeting or tell them to get current with everybody in the group. That's not really what it was talking about in there.
And didn't you even say that back then meetings were a suggestion?
Meetings were kind of a luxury.
Right.
One of the things that would happen was if you were serious, if they saw that you were serious about getting over this drinking thing, that meant that you were doing a lot of step work. And if you're doing a lot of step work, they would kind of pull you into their fold. And a lot of the meetings were about, talking about how to help other people, basically. That's what the first meetings were about. They would get together and discuss where they can find more prospects, where they can find more people to help. Very different than the meetings of today. There should be some difference in the meetings. They were learning early on. But again, what I'm very concerned about is how far away from the actual process of the 12 steps that are laid out in this book, some meetings and some fellowships have come and have gone today. Suppose now that through you, several families have adopted this way of life. What way of life? The way of the steps.
Way of the steps.
And of helping other people. You will want to know more of how to proceed from that point. Perhaps the best way of treating you to a glimpse of your future will be to describe the growth of the fellowship among us. Here is a brief account. Years ago, in 1935, one of our number made a journey to a certain western city, and that would be Bill's trip out to Akron to try to take over the tire company. From a business standpoint, his trip came off badly. His temporary partners left him there with no money, very disgruntled that the whole deal had blown up in their face.
Right.
Had he been successful in his enterprise, he would have been set on his feet financially, which at the time seemed vitally important. Yeah, he was positioning himself to become president of that tire company by doing a stock proxy fight. Thank God that Bill Wilson did not become the president of one more tire company in Akron. You and I might not be here today if he did. But his venture wound up in a lawsuit and bogged down completely. The proceeding was shot through with much hard feeling and controversy. Bitterly discouraged, he found himself in a strange place, discredited and almost broke. Still physically weak and sober but a few months, he saw that his predicament was dangerous. He wanted so much to talk with someone, but whom? Imagine this, Monty. You're sober. I think he was sober about 5 months or so. The whole thing blew up in his face. He didn't have enough money to get home. One more time, his plans and designs ended up, in turning into a nightmare. His self-esteem was tied into this. His reputation was tied into this. And here he is in a strange city, with maybe $5 or a couple of dollars left in his pocket. Not enough to get home, but just a couple of dollars in his pocket, completely dejected. This is the time where relapse can very well be imminent in situations like this. In the book and other places, it basically says that if your spiritual house is not in order, the certain trials or low spots ahead are not. You're not going to be able to maneuver your way through them. And this would have been one of those occasions. One dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby, wondering how his bill was to be paid. I still wonder how it got paid. I think he probably walked out on it. At one end of the room stood a glass-covered directory of local churches. Down the lobby, a door opened into an attractive bar. He could see the gay crowd inside. In there, he would find companionship and release. Unless he took some drinks, he might not have the courage to scrape up an acquaintance, and he would have a lonely weekend. Of course, he couldn't drink, but why not sit hopefully at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now, perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old, insidious insanity, that first drink. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. You know, that turn where he turned away from the bar and headed back to the church directory and the payphone is a very, very pivotal moment. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of people's sobriety and recovery hang on seconds and inches, you know, little defining moments that if they would have gone the other way, would have changed things forever, and that was certainly one of them. But I believe, here's my theory about this, I believe he had done enough work with other alcoholics. He had done an initial run through the steps, and he was continuing to work with other alcoholics when he was in New York. He was in fit spiritual condition. If he was not in fit spiritual condition, he would have turned toward the bar.
Which also meant that he was in a process of continuing to develop a relationship with the Creator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That was paramount back then. Developing a relationship with the Creator. There was nothing more important than that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in some of Dr. Bob's writings, you'll find where he'll say meetings were desirable. A morning prayer and meditation was essential to recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But what about his responsibilities? His family and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well. Ah, yes, those are other alcoholics. There must be many such in this town. He would phone a clergyman. His sanity returned, and he thanked God. Selecting a church at random from the directory, he stepped into a booth and lifted the receiver. Let me tell you a little bit about this, because this is another amazing piece of Alcoholics Anonymous history. On that directory was a list of all the churches and phone numbers to get a hold of them. Like probably 12 different churches were on that plaque on the wall. And he had a bunch of nickels that he had gotten from the bar. And he started dropping nickels into the phone and dialing these numbers. And literally, because I've heard this on some of his own tapes where he tells his story, what he would say is, "Hi, Father Flanagan. My name is Bill. I'm a rummy from New York, and I want to talk to another rummy." And time after time, all he heard was a dial tone. You know, these people were hanging up on him. Now he finally got a hold of Walter Tunks. Now, Walter Tunks was in a prayer group with Henrietta Seiberling and Ann Smith. They were doing the Oxford group stuff, and he understood a little bit about the spiritual process, and he understood that through this Oxford group, a lot of people were getting better, drunks included. Bob Smith was actually in Walter Tunks's prayer group at this time, I believe. So instead of Walter Tunks thinking this is a crackpot, this is a rummy that wants to talk to another rummy, what he basically said was, well, explain yourself a little bit. And Bill talked about how he was staying sober by helping other alcoholics. And he goes, well, I'll tell you what, let me give you a number of someone. And he gave Bill the number of Henrietta Seiberling. Henrietta Seiberling was very close to Ann Smith, Dr. Bob's wife, and she got a call from Bill that night. And they tried to arrange for Bill to come right over to meet with Dr. Bob that night, but he was too drunk. It had to be the next morning. Now, why was a call like this accepted? If you got a call from a drunk who wants to talk to another drunk, it would usually be there'd usually be a little bit of resistance taking it seriously or paying a lot of attention to it. But what had happened, Monty, is in this prayer group with Walter Tunks, Henrietta Seiberling, and Ann Smith, they had started to pray for Dr. Bob's recovery. And when Dr. Bob wasn't there, they would do prayer groups, and they would pray that something or someone would be able to help Dr. Bob. And all of a sudden, here's this phone call from a rummy from New York who has a cure, he was saying, for alcoholism, and he needs to talk to another rummy. Do you know anybody? What they said, instead of saying there's a crackpot and hanging up the phone, they were thinking, what took this guy so long to call? We've been praying for months.
Huh.
So it
Wow.
was the perfect storm. You know, it was the perfect storm for getting Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob together.
Mm-hmm.
His call to the clergyman led him presently to a certain resident of the town who, though formerly able and respected, was then nearing the nadir of alcoholic despair, and that was Dr. Bob. It was the usual situation: home in jeopardy, wife ill, children distracted, bills in arrears, and standing damaged. He had a desperate desire to stop, but saw no way out, for he had earnestly tried many avenues of escape. Remember, he was a doctor. He was trying as many medical solutions as there were at that time.
Sure.
Painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, the man did not fully realize what it meant to be alcoholic. Again, here is an amazing thing. A failed stock shyster comes out to Akron, Ohio, and gives a medical doctor, a surgeon, the medical estimate of what alcoholism was, because he was bringing it from Dr. Silkworth. So again, a very, very unusual that Dr. Bob would be listening to a medical estimate from a stockbroker. You know. When our friend related his experience, the man agreed that no amount of willpower he might muster could stop his drinking for long. And again, that really is the problem with alcoholism, and that's the part that's really misunderstood. It's misunderstood by everybody, practically, that if only we really wanted to not drink, we could. And again, these two guys, looking in each other's eyes, understood that here they were sitting in front of somebody else that understood.
Mm-hmm.
A spiritual experience, he conceded, was absolutely necessary, but the price seemed high upon the basis suggested. Again, Bill was following what you can find in the chapter Working with Others. You talk about your own drinking, then you talk about how desperate you were to stop, and then you talk about how you were exposed to the step process, the spiritual exercises of the steps, and how they brought on a spiritual awakening and enabled you to become recovered from alcoholism. And this is what Bill was sharing with Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob was saying, sure, I understand a spiritual experience, but some of the things that you're telling me you did, I just can't do. And mainly it was the ninth step. Mainly it was making amends. Dr. Bob just didn't feel enough spiritual fortitude at that point in time to actually go around and make direct amends to people. Remember, he was like a shattered wreck. He was a shaken, shattered wreck. It's very, very difficult for those people to think they have the power to go around town knocking on doors, making direct amends. And usually it's because they don't have the power right then and there.
Right.
The power comes when you start moving through these steps.
Yeah.
He told how he lived in constant worry about those who might find out about his alcoholism. He had, of course, the familiar alcoholic obsession that few knew of his drinking. Believe me, a lot of people knew about his drinking. Why, he argued, should he lose the remainder of his business only to bring still more suffering to his family by foolishly admitting his plight to people from whom he made his livelihood? Remember, Dr. Bob was a proctologist, and he was afraid if he told all his patients that he was an alcoholic, there wouldn't be too many more proctors that he'd be able to work on. So that really was his basic fear. He would do anything, he said, but that. Intrigued, however, he invited our friend to his home. Sometime later, and just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went on a roaring bender. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, and that God might give him mastery. God might give him mastery. Now, the situation was, at this point in time, Dr. Bob had to go to Atlantic City for his proctology convention, okay? He did it every year. That's what I do. I'm sorry. All this recovery stuff is very, very important, but I need to go to my convention. And that happens today when you're sponsoring people, Monty, and, they need to go tour with the Grateful Dead. Or something, or I always go to Aruba for spring break. They're going to have this idea that they need to do something, and that something is going to be very dangerous for their sobriety, especially if they haven't gone through the steps. And that's what happened with Bob. He got on a train to Atlantic City. He didn't even get off the train. He got drunk on the train. 3 days later or something, what happened is the train conductors got him back to Akron, called up his secretary, and she came down and they poured him off the train. I don't even think he got to Atlantic City. What a mess. But that's what happened to Dr. Bob on his last drunk. One morning, he took the bull by the horns and set out to tell those he feared what his trouble had been. He found himself surprisingly well received and learned that many knew of his drinking. Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly to a person in his line of business. At midnight, he came home exhausted but very happy. He has not had a drink since. Now, this is pretty important. The one part of the program Dr. Bob would not do was the ninth step. He was okay with everything else, and he ended up getting drunk. And I've seen that happen with alcoholics. I have seen that happen with alcoholics. I've seen them stop at step 8 or step 9 and get drunk. That's what is supposed to happen if you're an alcoholic. You are supposed to get drunk if you're not ready to right to the best of your ability the wrongs that you've caused in the past. It's important for your connection to God to have done right by the rest of God's children. It's a spiritual principle. And what happened was when he got poured off of that train and he started to detox, he had an operation that he could not postpone. There were no other surgeons that could do it. He had to do it, or really he would have gotten thrown out of the hospital, kicked off the surgical staff. So Bill and Ann, got him to the hospital. Bill gave him three bottles of beer, gave him a couple of second alls or whatever kind of benzodiazepines they had at that time. Got him looted up really good, and put his gown on him, put the gloves on him and the mask, and shoved him through the door. Get in there and go do that operation on that poor unsuspecting person in the harness straps. And as soon as he was done with that operation, he didn't go back out and see Bill and Ann. What he did was he headed for his car, and he realized that to stop this nightmare of a life he has, he needs to go make amends. And that's what he did. He went up one side of the street and down the other, and he admitted his harms. He asked them, what do I need to do to make this right? He did what you're supposed to do on an amends. And when he came back, it was late at night. He was exhausted. He had lived in that one town, and most of his harms had been in that one town, so he could really knock the amends out in a short amount of time. He got back, and he was exhausted, and he never drank again, Monty.
Do you think that one of the reasons, and probably a big reason, that people drink again if they do not do the 8th and 9th step is because if you have aught against your brother or your brother has aught against you and there's this conflict between you, that you shut yourself off from the sunlight of the Spirit? I do. And it's been expressed in many ways. Jesus basically said it by, don't be bringing gifts to the altar if you've got problems with your fellow man. Straighten out those problems with your fellow man, and then you can come to the altar. Then you can come to the Father. Yeah. Most religious traditions, most good philosophies will contend that we need to reduce the amount of guilt, shame, and remorse that we have inside of us to be able to comfortably move through life. I believe that there's cause and effect. I believe that when you go out and you make direct amends, there's nothing that will put more muscle into your recovery than that. And it makes you strong, and it makes you clear, and it gets rid of a lot of the things that block you off from a clear connection and a clear relationship to God. That's really the best way I can describe it. Cause and effect. I was doing an interview with an individual today who's a doctor, and not only is he a doctor, he's in a 12-step organization. He's in charge of detoxing a ton of people, but he understands
that detoxing is only the very beginning of a continuum that's going to lead to long-term recovery. And he said that the statistics on 28-day treatment are like 3% stay sober 5 years. He says the statistics on people in AA who do a fifth step are 60% stay sober 5 years. And I was telling him that I'll bet you nobody's probably done this this study, but I'll bet you anything 95% of the people who have gone out and made their amends are going to stay sober 5 years. There's cause and there's effect. Certain things work against addictive illness, and certain things don't. I think if we suffer from addictive illness, we need to pay attention to the things that work. And if we care about our lives or the lives of others, we need to get about the business of doing those things that work, however illogical or irregardless of whether there's a peer-reviewed efficacy study that's been done on these processes. We need to pay attention to what has worked for the most people and do it. I mean, that's the only responsible way to survive and to not cause more harm and misery in your family.
Here's an idea. This goes back to the 9th step promises. Assuming that a person is not doing this, we might say, if we avoid this phase of our development, we will be amazingly depressed before we're halfway through.
Yes.
We're not going to know any freedom. We're not going to know happiness. We're going to regret the past. We're going to want to shut the door on it. We won't be able to comprehend the word serenity. We're not going to know peace. And no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll
find we can go lower.
Yeah, we could go lower, and on it goes, because that would
absolutely.
be yeah.
But those are reverse promises.
Yeah.
I really wish that they would have done really critical studies of chronic alcoholics who engaged in this process. It's just not something that you're going to see much of, because rarely have we seen a person follow these suggestions, especially in this day and age. But I think that there's nothing more important. There's no process of recovery or treatment of alcoholism out there. There just isn't that's as effective as someone who is willing to do all this stuff. Now, now where there's a lot of argument in the treatment and recovery field is, well, what do you do about the people who are not willing to do these steps? What if they continue to be unconvinced at a level that's just so deep that they will not engage in this? They cannot come to the conclusion that this is what they need to do to recover. Should you abandon them? And certainly, I don't think they should be abandoned. And that's where that's a whole nother argument. What are you going to do about the people who are unwilling to completely give themselves to this simple program? That's a whole nother ball of wax. But for our particular study that we're doing, Monty, we're talking about the people who can and will completely give themselves to this simple program. And those people are going to be fine. They really are going to be fine. The people who are unwilling for whatever reason, they cannot or they will not give themselves to this program, there's a whole other gamut of stuff that's out there for them. There's multiple treatment experiences. There's medication maintenance. There's lobotomies. There's insane asylums. There's all kinds of harm reduction. There's all kinds of processes that are going to be put in front of these people. But I've got to tell you, the best deal on the planet for the alcoholic is what's in this book. As we shall see, he now means a great deal to his community, and the major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in 4. But life was not easy for the two friends. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually active. We must keep spiritually active. One day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class alcoholic prospect. Another funny part about this is Dr. Bob went into the hospital and started asking about alcoholic patients. And because he was a proctologist, they were going, well, what do you want to know about them for? And the head nurse basically asked, well, Dr. Bob, why do you care about alcoholics? And he goes, well, I think we found a cure for alcoholism. And the nurse looked at him and said to him, have you tried it on yourself? He had no idea she even knew he drank. He replied, yes, we've got a corker. He's just beaten up a couple of nurses. Goes off his head completely when he's drinking. But he's a grand chap when he's sober, though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. Understand, he was once a well-known lawyer in town, but just now we've got him strapped down tight. This was Bill Dotson, and Bill Dotson was a chronic, hopeless, low-bottom alcoholic. And he would go on these tears. And my particular experience with alcoholism, Monty, was I started to get more and more violent. In my drunken blackouts, I was reacting violently. It was a part of the insanity, and I was doing crazy things. And it's really lucky I'm not in prison right now.
Yeah,
doing life, But he actually blackened the eyes of a nurse or two, and when he came to, he was strapped down. He was in 4-point restraints, and imagine how horrible you feel when you find out that you've beaten up a nurse, and now you're strapped down in the hospital where that nurse works. I mean, the amount of shame and remorse that this guy must have been feeling is beyond belief. Here was a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. The use of steps in those days is not so well understood as it is now. But one of the friends said, put him in a private room, we'll be down. Now, another funny part of this story that Bill Dotson told, because I've heard his story on tape too, was no one got a private room until they were about to die. They figured that the private rooms were for the patients who deserved the dignity of dying, with just their family, not in a crowded room. So when they put this guy in a private room, he thought he was dying. He was quite concerned about it. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you fellows, and why this private room? I was always in a ward before. Said one of the visitors, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. That's what they called the step process. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here, I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. For an hour, the 2 friends told him about their drinking experiences. Over and over, he would say, that's me, I drink like that. And again, this is a beautiful example of a 12-step call. You need for the other person to identify with you. So you talk about your drinking experiences.
So they literally were telling him war stories.
They were basically telling him what it was like.
Yeah.
What it was like. This is how my drinking was. Not necessarily, the way you would think of a war story today.
Right.
More or less talking about the obsession of the mind, talking about the allergy of the body, talking about how the unmanageability manifested in their lives, and the problems that alcoholism caused. That's really what they were doing. The man in the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of the alcoholic and warps his mind, the obsession of the mind, the allergy of the body. There was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. Oh. Now, again, this is sometimes where we screw up when we're doing a 12-step call. We just talk about the war stories. Mm-hmm. We need to talk about that strange mental state that precedes the first drink, because that strange mental state that precedes the first drink, because that's the obsession of the mind. And that's the hard part for us to understand. Even into our last days of drinking, we really think we are the ones making the decision to drink. We don't know that we lack the power, choice, and control to not drink. So that needs to be hammered home whenever we're doing 12-step calls. We need to hammer that home, and we need to show from our own experience how that the obsession of the mind manifests. And I've got my own stories that I tell. You know, each of us has our own stories about how we drank at the worst time, the worst circumstance, with the worst consequences looming right at us. We still drank. And you know, that's a picture of the obsession of the mind.
We are so inundated with other people telling us, you know, you made the wrong decision. You can make the choice not to do that, and because we don't understand when we first come in, we believe that, and so that just piles more shame, which for me just brought on more drinking.
You know, Monty, I can't agree with you more. There's a lot of bad information that gets spread around the 12-step fellowships,
right?
Because a lot of bad treatment centers were churning people out in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They were told that they could prevent their own relapse by having relapse prevention training, and they were told how to people, places, and things are going to protect you, from picking up the drink, and they were being sold the line that they actually had the capacity to make a choice to drink or not drink. And, sometimes the alcoholic can. The problem is sometimes they can't.
Yeah, that's it.
So by telling somebody that you need to rely on making the right choice, you're handing them the wrong tool. It's not going to get the job done. And again, there are so many people with such bad information that wander around all the different 12-step fellowships today, that you really have to be discerning in who you listen to. You really do,
right?
Because it's quite possible 90% of the people in your meeting are heavy drinkers. They're not alcoholics, and they can put the plug in the jug. But the definition of an alcoholic is the person who can't, and a lot of times they do get shame, and they do get looked on like they're losers. They're not losers. They're ill. And if they can't find some kind of solace in the organization that was developed to help them specifically, then that's a really sad state of affairs.
I hate that phrase. Just hang out with the winners.
Well, you know what? We're supposed to hang out with the losers.
That's
what
right.
The book is telling us to do.
There you go.
Find the people that really need help and work with them. Mm-hmm. Offer them a way out. And then when you're done with them, you don't own them. You tell them to go out and do likewise with others. And then you keep moving forward. You keep finding people to work with.
Yeah.
That's the process in this book. It's morphed. All the 12-step fellowships have morphed into this bizarre self-help, group therapy thing that is, and the statistics have plummeted because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Plummeted.
Mm-hmm.
The Grapevine magazine, about a year ago, I think it was about March a year ago, published an article where they actually did a study, and this was not just AA, it was a lot of different 12-step fellowships concerning addictive illness, NA, CA,
right.
They went around to a lot of them, and they did surveys outside of the meeting, and they came to the conclusion that 45% of the people attending these 12-step fellowships had been sober less than 30 days, Monty.
Mm-hmm.
45% of them.
Yeah.
I've been sober less than 30 days. That's horrific. When this book says rarely have we seen a person fail, and then it talks about 75% permanent recovery rate for people who really try, something's gone wrong in a big way. And I got to tell you, there's no help coming from New York. I think the decisions that get made in the central office go against what is in this book and the processes involved and how these people were successful in the early days. They're more about promoting whatever everybody wants these days in these meetings. Whatever the group conscience wants. Let's turn the meeting into a bake sale or a bingo club or something. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But don't expect any help from the upper echelons of New York, to try to get things back on track. The only thing that's going to get it back on track is the renaissance that's going on in a lot of the 12-step fellowships, getting back to the basics of this book. That's the only thing that's going to help, and that's going to improve survivability for the alcoholic or the drug addict. So here he is. "Yes, that's me," said the sick man, "the very image. You fellows know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever. I can't stop." At this, both the visitors burst into laugh. Said the future fellow anonymous, "Damn little to laugh about that I can see." The two friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they carried out. What's the course of action, Monty?
The steps.
Absolutely. He interrupted. "I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I've prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock I'd be boiled as an owl." Next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. "Maybe you're right," he said. "God ought to be able to do anything." Then he added, "He sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone." On the third day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator, step 3, and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. Right there on the detox bed on day 3, he started to have a spiritual experience. And I think that happens when willingness comes. I think that's the beginning of the spiritual experience, Monty. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. He entered a political campaign, making speeches, frequenting men's gatherings, places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He lost the race by only a narrow margin. But he had found God, and in finding God, he found himself. That's an interesting paragraph, too. You have to understand, he was also working with alcoholics. He stuck with Bill and Bob until the end of his days. He stuck with the Alcoholics Anonymous crew. And he went out, on many nights he went out trying to help other alcoholics. So he'd gone through the steps, and he was trying to help other alcoholics. But he also thought he should run for mayor, like a week sober.
I'm going to be a drug and alcohol counselor. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I'm going to be a drug and alcohol. So much for no major changes in the first year. I'm going to be mayor. And, they didn't care back then. They thought, all right, you got God by your side. God bless you. Just remember, you need to continue to work with other alcoholics and pray and meditate on a regular basis and meet with us. You got to stay by your people. That was in June 1935. He never drank again. He, too, has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. After several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He consented, however, to go to the hospital, where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. He had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, "The way you fellas put this spiritual stuff makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were right after all." So 1 more was added to the fellowship. All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident remained in that town. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, Dr. Bob, the lawyer, Bill Dotson, and the devil-may-care chap. These men have found something brand new in life. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. I wonder how many people in the 12-step fellowships are doing that today. They were willing, by day or night, to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. A year and 6 months later, these three had succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release, and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. Okay, that's what it was about. It wasn't about going there like it was a spiritual gas station to fill up.
Right.
It was more about going there to figure out how to give back. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was to provide a time and a place where new people might bring their problems. This is a misunderstood paragraph, Monty. Set aside one night a week where anyone and everyone can come and newcomers can share their problems. I don't know about you, but some of the areas that I've frequented in 12-step oriented fellowships, they set aside 7 nights a week where newcomers can bring their problems.
Yeah.
To the meeting. When really those problems, what you do? You share the problem with your sponsor or spiritual advisor, and then you share the solution at the meeting. That's the right way to do it.
That's right. Well, let me ask you a question here, Chris.
Sure.
And you, I'm sure you've experienced this. Somebody will make a mention of, some people have been sharing and they've been bleeding all over the table, and it's just been a rough time for them this week. And somebody will make a comment about that's not what we share in here, and then somebody will blow up and say, if I can't share what's on my heart in here, then, what good is this? And that kind of thing. And just get really hurt by the fact that their friends were shut down by this guy. What does that say to the newcomer?
Again, all problems can be solved by one simple thing in these fellowships, Monty, and that is strong sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a sponsor, and the sponsor should share with you what's appropriate to share at the meetings. Mm-hmm. They should be giving you some guidance on that. The people who just love to hear themselves talk, there's a lot of people like that. There's the people who talk about their VA recovery program and their PTSD stuff, and there's people who will just share and share and share and share because they think sharing is helping them. What they really need is they need strong sponsorship. They need strong guidance. I'm not the type of person who shames somebody in one of these support
right,
meetings.
Me either.
I don't say, shut up, take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth. I think that the illness of alcoholism or drug addiction is shaming enough. We don't need to be shaming. But,
that's right.
But someone needs to take responsibility, and a lot of times it's the leader. The meeting, the leader of the meeting. One of the things I think that's appropriate in that case is to directly ask the person, do you have a sponsor? Do you have someone that you're working with right after they're done sharing? And if they say no, say, well, look, most of what you're talking about can be solved by good sponsorship. I would recommend that you get a sponsor. I don't think that there's anything real wrong with that. But telling somebody they're stupid or telling somebody that they're wrong, that can be shaming. There are other ways to do it more delicately, more compassionately. Does that make any sense?
It makes absolute sense. Thank you.
Outsiders became interested. One man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. That's T. Henry and Clarice Williams. This couple has since become so fascinated that they have dedicated their home to the work. Many a distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem, to hear from the lips of their husbands what had happened to them, to be advised how her own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when next he stumbled. That was the origins, I think, of the Al-Anon family systems, the T. Henry and Clarice meetings. Many a man yet dazed from his hospital experiences stepped over the threshold of that home into freedom. Many an alcoholic who entered there came away with an answer. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes and understood his. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated entirely when later, in an upper room of his house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. Okay, that's a fifth step experience. And again, there's something about visiting somebody in the hospital. They liked to do that back then. Even if you didn't need to be detoxed, they would put you in a hospital because they had you in a controlled environment, and then they would bring in the people to do their 12-step calls. I have done 12-step calls in hospitals a lot of times, Monty. That usually results in the person feeling obligated enough to you because you went and visited them to start coming around and to start working with you. It's not always 100% effective, but it's much better than to give somebody a meeting book. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Send somebody some literature. It's much better the one-on-one contact.
Yeah.
The expression on the faces of the women, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men, the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place conspired to let him know that here was haven at last. The very practical approach to his problems, the absence of intolerance of any kind, the informality, the genuine democracy, the uncanny understanding which these people had was irresistible. He and his wife would leave elated by the thought of what they could now do for some stricken acquaintance, his family. They knew they had a host of new friends. It seemed they had known these strangers always. They had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. They had visioned the great reality, their loving and all-powerful Creator. Remember that the healing that these people experienced, they related it as the direct result of an all-loving and all-powerful Creator. That's how they explained this miracle. And it's the way we continue to explain it in 12-Step Fellowship.
I'm noticing here, for instance, saying that the uncanny understanding which these people had were irresistible, and it's almost suggesting here that that they weren't used to having people talk that deeply about themselves or their issues. Was this a time back then when really the elephant in the middle of the living room, even more than today, just wasn't talked about?
I think when people talked about how their illness presented, how alcoholism presented, they talked about all the crazy things that happened in their lives, and then they talked about their spiritual recovery process and the experience they've had with that. I think that's basically what they did. And was there a little bit of informality about it? Was there some jokesters, and was there some people that were heavily religious, and was there some people who were a little bit more psychological? And, were there different people? Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But for the most part, this is what those gatherings looked like. People were sharing their experience, their strength, and their hope. They were sharing what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And again, I think we can take some lessons from that. So often when you go into a speaker meeting in any fellowship, what you hear is what it was like, what it was like, what it was like. You don't hear what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today.
Right.
You basically hear 40 minutes of drunkalog, and then I got sober. Thank you. And the meeting's over. That's not a good way to balance out, sharing your recovery experience. Now this house will hardly accommodate its weekly visitors, for they number 60 or 80 as a rule. Alcoholics are being attracted from far and near, from surrounding towns, families driving long distances to be present. People were coming down from Cleveland. A community 30 miles away has 15 fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Being a large place, we think that someday its fellowship will number in many hundreds. That happened very, very soon. The Cleveland group really exploded. The Cleveland group really taught people how to become involved. Clarence Snyder and his Cleveland boys, they got about the business of getting out there and sharing the message. They put ads in the paper, got a drinking problem, call Clarence. They really got busy in a big way and accomplished a lot. Hundreds of people were in the Cleveland group in a very short period of time. But life among Alcoholics Anonymous is more than just attending gatherings and visiting hospitals, cleaning up all scrapes, helping to settle family differences, explaining the disinherited son to his irate parents, lending money and securing jobs for each other when justified. These are everyday occurrences. No one is too discredited or has sunk too low to be welcomed cordially if he means business. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is a qualifier there, if he means business. And what did they mean by that? They meant, was this individual willing to do the 12 steps? If he wasn't, he did not mean business, and he was not welcomed.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where the tradition came in. That the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. It used to be an honest desire to stop drinking, and it used to be stronger than that. It used to mean if they meant business. And I think it's right and well to open the doors as wide as possible. I would rather have 5 people in there that don't belong than to lose one person that does. I really would, Monty.
Yeah.
But I also think it's important for us to understand the origins of this whole process. You really do need to mean business to be able to recover.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot recover sitting in a chair. You cannot recover sharing. You cannot recover making coffee. You cannot recover going on speaking commitments. You cannot. That's not how you recover.
That's not
you
how
can
we do
stay
it.
sober that way if you're lucky, but you need to mean business to recover. You need to be like Dr. Bob, washing his hands from the operation, getting in his car and going up one side of the street and down the other, making amends. That's the type of mean business that they were talking about back then.
Sure. Chris, we are right up against the clock.
Okay.
So we're going to pause here. Folks, we're on page 161 at the bottom, and we're going to pick this up next week with part 3 of A Vision for You, and possibly even start out with Dr. Bob's Nightmare.
Yes, that would make sense.
That would be great. All right. Boy. I just, I'm amazed. I'm amazed. Talk about being amazed before you're halfway through. This whole workshop, this whole study is just been a real blessing for me, and I know so many other people have enjoyed this as well, and certainly the group that I work with on Thursday mornings. So, Chris, you're off to a speaking engagement, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to go down and speak at an event, a Serenity Weekend in Williamsburg, Virginia. I will be down there this weekend doing that.
Well,
so it's going to be fun.
You just have an absolutely awesome time. Let the people down there know that we're going to have a heck of a DVD ready for them here in just a few weeks. And we'll go from there. We'll see everybody next week then.
Absolutely. Monty, it is always a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. All right, my friends and families and recovery type like folks, don't forget to check out our new blog and also the YouTube videos. You can go to those just by going to take12radio.com on your internet dial. Don't forget to come back next week. So once again, and I should say for once again, take an hour to walk through the big book. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.